So for about 12 years, I ran an ad agency that specialized in profitably scaling paid advertising. What I mean by profitably scaling is if somebody came to us at $25,000 a month to spend, they'd have this experience where they were basically saying, we are spending $25,000 a month and we are profitable. And every time we try to scale to 35 or 40,000 a month, we become unprofitable. We had a system that basically helped them to overcome that situation, because the other thing that they would experience is people would say, you can't be profitable, or you have to be unprofitable for a period of time, and then you become profitable at the new level. And that's true. Sometimes that happens, but we had a system specifically that was designed so that we could scale up to whatever level they wanted to, only constrained by their market, profitably. That was our niche. That was our specialty in paid advertising. And that was what we did best, in my opinion, at the time. I was at a point in my business that things were going pretty well. You know, we had a really solid base of high ticket clients. We were very profitable. But when I started to suspect that basically from a business perspective, something was wrong. And basically what this was is this started to come from my personal life. At this time, previous to having a kid and having a new growing family and these things, I was working like 90 to 100 hours per week, and I didn't care, right? When it was just me by myself, single, I pretty much did nothing except work on my business. That was it. I'd work on my business nonstop, take breaks once in a while to go grab a bite to eat, go get some drinks with friends, maybe take a day or a weekend off to go snowboarding or do something like that, go on a little trip. But for the most part, like I would say average, I worked 90 to 100 hours per week. So here I am, I've got my business, I've got this great result, this great offer that I'm working on for people. And I realized for the first time, as I was trying to cut back how much I was working in my business and spend more time with my new family, my wife and my son, I was realizing something was broken pretty badly in my business. This type of experience happens all too often. I think a lot of times the progress is slower, but this was one of those I got hit between the eyes type situation, ran into a brick wall type thing. Basically, for the week or two before this, I was researching all kinds of things like, why am I having to work so much in my business? Why am I working so hard? Like, why is my business not growing? I was doing all this research on basically these problems that I was having, which were, I was kind of looking at it at the time like, it was more like, if the business were growing, I could justify this. Like if I was in a period of like, I'm focusing on growing it a lot, I could justify like, hey, I'm going to work more in the business to grow it to a certain point for a while. We were growing very slowly at this point. And this is an ad agency, right? So we grew really fast, but now we were growing much slower at the point that we were at. So I felt like I couldn't justify the longer hours. The other thing that was happening is with this, why I brought up what we did and the niche and the specialty and what our offer was and what we did for our clients, was because this created a situation where our pricing structure, our offer, our model, what we did for people made it so that we had like an incredibly high average customer value. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars per customer. And with the amount of money that we were spending on ads at the time and the amount of predictability and scalability that we had, within basically, I want to say it was like a 1.5 to 2 year period of time, we had gone from like, we're doing pretty well for our clients to our clients have now generated hundreds of millions from the ad spend. And because of the way our model worked, we were also, as they grew, we were also growing. But when I was at this point where I'm like, I'm working a lot, I've got more responsibility, And when I'm looking at the records of the business, we're not growing as fast. I was in this situation where to me, it was kind of like, when you get off the highway, like you're driving really fast on the highway and you get off and you go to a road, residential road or whatever, and you're going like 25 miles per hour and you feel like you're not moving. That was the situation to me. I'm talking to these really high level clients, doing these reviews on their accounts, doing the reviews on how much they've grown, what their numbers are month over month, growth month over month, all these different things. And I'm not joking. We had some people that were like, hey, we're at $1 million for the year. And within like a year and a half, they're like, we're doing $1 million per month. And some even more. Like we had some that were like, hey, we're doing 5 to 10 million. And now we're doing 40 million or 35 million or 50 million or 70 million. We're seeing these massive jumps. And it was so clear. I look back at those companies and I'm like, they had amazing teams. They had amazing leadership. I'm in no way saying we were the ones that were responsible because they had the infrastructure to be ready for what we were doing. And that is hard to do. But we often served as a catalyst to these businesses. So we're like, they're at this point where they've got all this infrastructure, but they're stuck. And now we come in and it's like, hey, you've just, basically doubled in 6 months. You were at I remember this one, they're like, we're at 15,000 per month. What could we get to this month? And I was like, well, let's just keep in touch and see what we can get to. I was like, could we aim for 100,000 spend in the month? Right. So they're spending 15,000. I was like, let's aim for 50 to 100,000. Like, I know that that's a huge range, but if we do that, can you afford it? And they're like, yes. And we took them from 15,000 in that month of spend to 70,000 per month in spend that month profitably. That's a massive, massive jump. So this is the situation that we're in. As you can imagine, as I'm looking at those numbers and the amount of money that's being made and the amount of money that's being generated, how quickly we're scaling, and then I'm looking at our business and I'm like, what the heck? Like, it's like getting off the highway and going into a residential. Now, I knew that there was a problem. I had been doing research. I had been hiring consultants. I had been educating myself to build this foundation. But there was this one call that I had as I don't know if I'll ever forget this experience because it was just it was just that moment to me where everything shifted. I'm getting goosebumps, or as we say out here in Hawaii, chicken skin, talking about this, right? Because it's just such a vivid memory. Now, keep in mind that at this time, I've got a newborn at home. And this just shows you how important a supportive partner is, supportive spouse is, right? So I take this last call and we're going over the numbers. And this guy he'd been working with us for maybe, let's say 9 months to a year. We're going over the numbers. We're doing all the reviews, all the number of ads, all these different things. And I'm like, this guy is doing as much in a month as he used to do in the entire year. I'm looking at the retainer, what we're making, the results, and I'm like, why, if I'm able to help with that, I know that there's more to this, right? But I was like, if I'm able to help with that, then why am I not able to do that over here in my own business? It goes to show you how great a supportive partner is in business. I get off that call, I'm just kind of like awestruck by what I heard and the progress that's being made. This guy's a really smart guy, super experienced entrepreneur. But I get off the phone and I call my wife. I said, hey, hon, I know that this is a lot to ask, but I got to work late. I got to work really late. And I'm going to potentially, if you can handle it, if this is okay, I know we got a newborn, right? Ideally, I'd like to have the option to even work through the night, if you're okay with it. And she's like, if you need to do it, you need to do it. Okay. I didn't work through the whole night. I worked through most of the night. But I was like, okay, thank you. Whatever we got to do to make this work, like, I just need to do this. She's like, okay. So I get off the phone There's this great little hole in the wall pizza place near our office. I order pizza because basically I had decided, I was like, I have to figure this out. I have to figure this out because it's just driving me crazy. I've got to figure out why I'm working so much, why I'm working more, and we're not growing, like we're growing in single digits, like 2%, 3%, and these people are growing like 30%, 50%, 100% very, very quickly. And what is basically I sat there and I need to figure out what is the difference? What is the difference? And I knew that I had this great pool of different types of businesses. We're working with a lot of SaaS, a lot of e-commerce, a lot of coaching and consulting businesses. We're working with a lot of these types of businesses. And then I had my agency. What those businesses had that I didn't. I knew that there had to be something there. Why can they grow so fast and my agency can't? And I had this big whiteboard in my office and I was like, I'm just going to lock myself in here. Everybody's going to be gone for the day. And I'm just going to focus and I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to stay up all night if I have to, but I'm going to figure it out. So I got my pizza, my food, my drinks, and I was like, I'm just going to do it. And basically what it came down to is I looked at every single business that we were working with, and I looked at their numbers and I looked at who was growing the fastest. And I looked at the numbers that, keep in mind, I had been collecting these and doing these quarterly reviews and looking at the numbers and the growth metrics and month over month. And I looked at basically what is it that the companies that are growing the fastest have in common. From past experience, reading past books, looking at basically these specific problems that I was having in the business at the time, one thing kept coming out to me, which was these businesses are unlimited in how many customers, for the most part, they can handle, right? They don't have a limit on customers. I remember it started to remind me, I had a bunch of books in my office. I had books everywhere in my office. And I ran over, I grabbed the book Good to Great by Jim Collins, and I started looking at that concept of the flywheel concept, where he talked about how these businesses kept growing. You know, the more they grew, the easier the business got. And that triggered this memory for me of watching a video about the flywheel concept and how basically certain businesses have this ability to create this virtuous cycle within the business. And I was like, that to me was like this trigger point that I latched onto. And I looked at it and I was like, all of these businesses that I'm looking at, these massive growth numbers and this massive scale that they've been able to achieve, I was like, they all seem to have this ability to basically take on unlimited clients. Whereas for me, in my agency, for what we did and how we worked, in order for me to take on more clients, like that was actually a hassle, right? Like it actually became harder. And so the more clients I was taking on, the harder it was becoming. And what I realized as I started to basically look at this concept was when they got clients, there was no additional load on the business. There was no like extra employees that was needed. Nobody extra was coming on board. More clients actually made better results for the business. Whereas with mine, I was limited in the number of clients that I could have. And each client that I took on after a certain point, remember I said in the business, we grew really quickly, right? But now it was like getting harder and harder the more we grew. Whereas for them, they grew really slowly, but they reached a tipping point where the more customers they got, the easier running the business became. And when I looked at that, I was like, their growth curve is almost the opposite of mine, right? And I grew really fast at first and then slowed down, and every customer I got after that became harder and harder to serve, to a certain point where now, it was like we'd be at a point where like we couldn't take any more customers, right? Now this caused our prices to be higher. We controlled some supply and demand, which made it so that we were able to basically have a wait list and pick up clients at will. But for the most part, that was there because we couldn't take on any more clients. we would hover between 30 and 35 core scaling clients. We had some other services that other account managers did that were smaller. Maybe we had 40 or 50 of those, which were not scaling accounts, they were maintenance accounts, but all these ones that were scaling at a certain point, I had to be involved in. And so when I looked at that and realized this is not an issue, this doesn't seem to be a problem with how we're doing business or how we're marketing. This is a problem with the service that we're offering. What I started to see was that I had put myself in a position where if I got a new client, I had to take extra time to work with and onboard that client. And that meant that I had to take time away from somewhere else. I had to either choose to take time away from scaling somebody else's account, my own marketing and my business of getting new clients, my family, or any personal time that I got. And the majority of the extra time that I was spending in the business was me working extra after hours to work on stuff that I had moved around basically to onboard a client. So a lot of my extra time being spent was spent on these issues. When I had this realization, of course, my first thought was like, oh, well, if we just hire more people that can do certain parts of this, then that'll solve that problem. But this is on a different day, of course, but this led me to realize that more variables, more people basically almost never make something more efficient. And we ran into problems like people being able to handle the pressure, people having apprehension about how much money they were, managing or onboarding for somebody, and then wanting an increase in their pay because of how much we were getting paid from these clients that they were having to basically get set up and collected on. And there was a lot of problems that came from, hey, let's just solve this with bringing on more people. It created more problems than any benefit that came from it. So basically, over time, I realized this is a business problem. This is the structure of how this business operates and how its services are provided that is the problem. It helped me to see that there are businesses and services offered by those businesses that have a virtuous cycle. There are types of businesses where every client you get makes the business work better and more efficiently. And there are businesses where there's not additional load for taking on new clients and that there's leverage. I started to look at how can I make adjustments to my business, or even look at redefining how this service is offered in a new business that has these components, that has this virtuous cycle where every client that I bring on in the agency or in the business makes basically running the business easier, as opposed to every client I bring in makes the business harder, puts the business at more risk. It has me only taking away time from my existing clients or my own marketing, which means that in both cases, if I take time away from my existing clients, they get worse results. Worse results means that I'm gonna lose them as a client, or I'm gonna get a bad reputation. Or the other option is I take time away from marketing my own business. When I take the time away from marketing my own business, I get less clients. And that puts me in a cycle where if I lose a client, it's even worse. Maybe you've experienced kind of this gridlock situation. So the point is that the solution to this is twofold. It's something that it's not sexy to talk about, but you're going to hear me talk about it a lot in videos, and you're going to hear me share a lot about it on social media, able to go viral, but it's because it is the thing that really makes a difference. And I invested a lot in figuring it out for my business and figuring out how to apply it for others. And that is the concept of, one, how do I intentionally build a flywheel into my business? And that flywheel is a virtuous cycle. It's a system that gets better and better. And how do I create a competitive advantage in my business, which is called an economic moat? And economic moats are things like network effects, embedding, scale, switching costs, all these different things that basically provide a competitive advantage, so that as you get that scale and people see, hey, you've got this scale, I'm going to see if I can basically copy your business and create and basically get some of the market share that you have, which always happens, that you have defense against that. And those things they're not the same thing, but if you do it right and you do it intentionally, they work together. As many of you know, I left the agency business. I exited that business. I sold part of that business to my partner. I went into business acquisition, another story for another time. But when I get involved with helping a business at whatever level, the things that I started to find had the bigger impact was figuring out how to systematically create flywheels to do it intentionally, and also how to create a competitive advantage. These things made it so that not only did the marketing work better, but also that as the marketing continued to work, the business didn't have load on it because each customer it got made the business harder to run. Instead, the business got easier to run the more customers it had. And two, as that business grew to a point where it had so many customers that it was becoming the dominant business in the industry, and they were then having attention of others in the industry and the media and people who would want to imitate them, that it would be very difficult for people to do that and capture any meaningful market share. So that's the reason I talk about those things. It came from that one experience of looking at why my business was broken and staying up basically most of the night. I want to say I worked until like 3 a.m. to figure out what the difference was between my business and those other businesses. And that time, by the end of that day, I remember knowing, I didn't know all the things I just shared with you, but what I did know is I knew that the model of the business, how they made their services and their offers and their products was way more leveraged than mine. And I knew that they had a system for basically where their growth curve was the opposite. And the more they grew, the easier their business got to grow. And so that led me to the path of becoming obsessed with flywheels and how to actually build them. Because while there's a lot of people in business that do talk about the flywheel concept, like Jim Collins does, there are very few people that actually understand how to intentionally build one. They don't understand them well enough. They're aware of the concept, but they don't understand the concept well enough to know how do we actually build it in the business, right? We can see one, we can observe one from the evidence, but how do we build one systematically? What do we do? I became obsessed with that. And then once we've built it, what's the next thing that's most valuable is how do we protect it and maintain our market share? So that's how I came to those conclusions and why I've now at this point basically spent the last 8 years obsessing over these concepts that are not popular, but are the thing that provide probably the most value of anything in business that I've seen. If you've kind of experienced some of these same things that I experienced and you're interested in hearing more about how to apply these things in your business, then definitely hit that subscribe button, because even though it's not going to make my content and my videos go viral, it is something that has had the biggest impact on my business over the past 8 to 10 years, this type of thinking and looking for these things. So if you're interested in that, you want to see more about it, definitely hit that subscribe button. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and I look forward to seeing you in another video.